Welcome everyone. Welcome. We're all gathered here for one purpose, to bring about a nature positive future. This is, of course, as most of you know, the NTC Now. It's one of the gatherings of the Nature Tech Collective. We're a coalition of organizations working relentlessly across categories towards this nature positive future. Our members are on the ground restoring degraded ecosystems. They're developing cutting edge monitoring technologies. They're creating powerful AI and visualization platforms that can transform data into actions, really. Or they're channeling critical resources where they're needed the most. Today, we're bridging the gap between innovation and impact to accelerate nature-based solutions at scale. I'm Paige, by the way. I'm the head of community at the Nature Tech Collective, and each week or twice a month, we bring together these experts who are harnessing technology to regenerate our natural world. So throughout our content arc, we've been systematically exploring how nature tech solutions are implemented and scaled in the real world. Today, we're diving into a case study of forest restoration through the lens of an innovative business model, NatureRe's pioneering project in Antioquia, Colombia. It's demonstrating how assisted natural regeneration can transform degraded cattle ranching land into thriving forest ecosystems. We're going to see some pictures of that. This session is going to explore several key themes: the spectrum of restoration approaches and why ANR represents an optimal middle ground, the science-driven process for selecting sustainable restoration sites, and how NatureRe establishes baselines or measures impact over time. Also, innovative financial models that bridges investors seeking impact with communities benefiting from forest restoration, and how they're creating sustainable livelihoods for local communities while generating high-quality carbon credits. So I'm delighted to welcome Olivia Gumbel from NatureRe, who has been instrumental in developing this pilot as well. Olivia, thank you so much for joining us today. Before we dive into all of the specifics, can you give us the basics? What is NatureRe, and how did this pilot come about?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Paige, and thanks to the Nature Tech Collective for organizing these webinars. It's great to be part of a really insightful community and lots of great members in our ecosystem that we're really excited to work with and then meet new ones as well. So I'm Olivia. I'm the Marketing and Communications Manager at NatureRe. NatureRe is focusing on ecosystem restoration, where our mission is really to invest in nature, restore biodiversity, and remove carbon at scale. So we have a quite ambitious vision to manage over 1 billion euros by 2030, remove 140 million tons of CO2 from the atmosphere, and create one of the largest natural reserves. So we offer high quality, high yield, and highly scalable nature-based carbon removal credits. We work with financial sectors, so different kinds of investors, as well as off-takers. And we created a business model around nature restoration. We really believe that nature restoration is something that needs to be scaled. And for it to be scaled, we need to make it attractive, de-risked. So I'll be talking about a reference project in Antioquia. We're operating for the moment in Colombia, as well as how we created this business model and how we combine the financial aspect, the ecosystem restoration aspect, and our carbon expertise.
Fantastic. Okay, so the pilot started before NatureRe even existed. Can you actually dig in more into that history for this site?
Yeah, absolutely. So in 2014, our current CEO and co-founder Daniel was working in Colombia and decided to restore a plot of land in Choco. So it was a small plot of land, and he basically didn't do much except for showcase how natural regeneration actually works. So by letting nature regrow, nature retaking its marks, taking away some of the pressures on this land, which usually were cattle ranching activities, he actually just kind of created a business model around this restoration process. So natural regeneration has so much potential to completely change an ecosystem. I'm actually going to share a picture of a before and after we have between Can you see my screen?
Yes.
So here on the left, you can see in 2014, this is how the land started off as, and then on the right in 2021, this is how, by not really doing much and allowing, especially natural regeneration to go, you can just completely see how the whole entire ecosystem transformed. Obviously, this is a really small plot of land, and the point was to really try to make a whole business model out of it, how to scale this, how to make it, much bigger than this small instance. So through this kind of approval of this methodology of assisted natural regeneration, he then created this business model to be able to scale up our nature restoration expertise. So in 2022, we started our pilot project in Antioquia. We're currently restoring 700 hectares of degraded land. So this degraded land used to be used for cattle ranching activity, and actually, it was really overly exploited, which means that it wasn't even that productive anymore for cattle ranching activities. And mixing our restoration expertise as well as our financial expertise, we decided to create a model where we would take control of the full value chain of a project development. So finding the investors who want to have an impact investment, invest into a project, get a return on their investment, depending on their investor profiles. I'll be talking a bit more about our business model, but then we're actually really developing a restoration project. So working in carbon removal, working with high certifications and methodologies. We're working at the moment with Vera, transitioning to a new methodology that has some high standards for carbon, but also for biodiversity and for society. So half of our team is actually based in Colombia, so we work with our local expertise as well as some local but also international partners. And then we find off-takers who want to purchase some high-quality nature-based carbon removal credits with social and biodiversity co-benefits. And so we kind of match these investors and off-takers, restore the land, and at the end of the project, this land becomes a natural reserve. So we're certifying it with a Colombian certifier called Res Nature, who's actually in charge of lots of the national parks in Colombia. And the point is really just to transform these lands into natural reserves. So we're trying to combine, financially de-risked and science-backed restoration at scale.
As is the tension for what you do.
Mhm.
Can you tell us more then about assisted natural regeneration, what it means, where it sits on the spectrum between kind of natural recovery and active restoration, and actually why it's effective for tropical ecosystems, which is where you're at in Colombia, right?
Yeah, exactly. So in nature restoration, there's lots of different types of nature restoration. You can have natural recovery, which is basically no intervention apart from monitoring and, further degradation. And then on the other side of the spectrum, there's active restoration. So this is more like major landforms and hydrological modifications. And assisted natural regeneration is a very flexible technique, which kind of sits at the middle of that. So the main premise is to take away what keeps nature from restoring itself. So we let nature do most of the work and let nature regrasp and really restore an ecosystem as best as nature would. So it's truly based on the belief, obviously, that us as humans, we can implement lots of different techniques, but nature will possibly know best how to restore itself. So taking away all these blockers, such as, in our case, cattle ranching, but also invasive species or chemicals. And then on about 10% of the land, we have these soft interventions that will kind of control dominant grasses, manage different species, and effectively have, a high tree growth rate and a high ecosystem restoration, which then restores biodiversity. So we're focusing on tropical ecosystems, but actually assisted natural regeneration can be really applied onto so many different ecosystems. So there's a lot of research on assisted natural regeneration made by the ANR Alliance, for example, and they work with World Resource Institute. And so they've been showcasing lots of different studies, including like projects in the Philippines, projects in Brazil and the Amazon, projects, highland rainforests in India, subtropical forests in Australia, savannas in Kenya. So it's really applicable to so many different ecosystems. We're focusing on Colombia and especially on, for the moment, the region of Antioquia. Also going to move over to other regions such as Santander because of multiple reasons. First of all, there is a fast tree growth rate. So for our business model, that works quite well. But also because it is the most biodiverse country per hectare. Brazil is the most biodiverse country in the world globally, but Colombia is the most biodiverse country per hectare. So we really want to put that at the forefront of our restoration. We're not just capturing carbon, we're really restoring entire ecosystems. In terms of then what ANR looks like in practice, it's kind of a mix of techniques between, enhancing biodiversity, natural recovery, connectivity. So let me just once again share my screen just to show you some different designs of some ANR methods.
Please.
All right. So here, for example, on the left, we have nucleation, which is used to replicate the natural succession processes. So we establish like a cluster of woody vegetation throughout a clearing. And these clusters are what we call nuclei, expand via the subsequent recruitment of new seedlings, just like a nucleation succession would take place. So this allows for existing forests to actually restore the forests and to help the forest that was degraded to regenerate. So we work on lands that have a specific percentage of existing forest that is still intact, which is about 20 to 30%. And then we have about 70 to 80% of the land which is degraded, and it's those 20 to 30% which are going to help out via our soft interventions, those 70 to 80% of land to actually restore. So in the middle, you can see the corridors. So basically, it's allowing stretches of forest to be united. So we link areas with similar characteristics and subjected kind of to the same type of restoration interventions. There's also different enrichment planting. So establishing tree species within an area in which there's already some sort of pre-existing cover. And to increase the actual tree density. So depending very much on where we're at and what the topography of the land actually looks like, we can implement some various techniques. But I think what I really want to emphasize is that the main point of assisted natural regeneration is to have low intervention, high impact, making sure that you're taking away all the barriers and actually just managing the land, monitoring the progress to be able to have a restoration that is resilient, lasting, long-term, high biodiversity, but also just resembles the native ecosystem as much as possible.
And when we last kind of talked about this project, you mentioned a 17 variable land selection process. Can you walk us through some of those key ecological, legal, commercial factors that determine how you know what land is suitable for this approach?
Yeah, absolutely. So, land selection is a really essential part of how we go about a project and how we de-risk our project. So, because we're transforming these lands into natural reserves, we're actually trying to increase permanence by purchasing plots of land. So, we purchase plots of lands from private owners who either don't want to be cattle ranchers anymore, or want to retire, or lots of different ways that they want to, or reasons why they would want to sell their land. And in this whole land selection, first of all, we remove any kind of conflict zone. So whether it's armed groups in Colombia, or if there's indigenous communities on these lands, those are completely discarded from our land selection. But then we have lots of different variables which make this land suitable for AR projects in general. So it should have not been a forest for the last 10 years, for example, but also for a methodology. So what I was saying about this percentage and this balance between existing forest cover and then a degrading forest, that's really important. Then we look at different legal characteristics. So we obviously want to make sure that we have a trace of ownership, that we know who we're purchasing this land from and that this is the actual proper owner. And then there's some various commercial aspects which we need to look into, such as land prices. So we want to make sure that the land is selected where there's a high tree growth rate potential, high biodiversity, obviously local community acceptance, to be able to have a lasting impact, but also de-risk our business model at the very beginning stage.
Okay. And once you've chosen this landscape and started operating on it, how are you measuring the impact of your restoration work? I know you started working with tree economy for some projects. Um, but anyway, yeah, can you explain your monitoring approach for flora, fauna, and actually how this connects to your carbon credit verification process with Vera?
Yeah, absolutely. So we work with Vera. So we started implementing the methodology in end of 2022 and did all of our monitoring. We do obviously monitoring across throughout time, but we've had some monitoring reports for carbon, fauna, flora, and water that we've just done in the past couple of months. So for flora, we actually planted 23 native species based on different functional traits and site-specific conditions. And we designed the planting to have, adequate spacing to encourage layering, reduce competition. There's a big aspect at the beginning of a project where we need to minimize the invasive grass to be able to let the trees actually grow. And we want to make sure also that we contribute to different conservation values, support wildlife attraction, and protect certain species that are vulnerable or critically threatened on the IUCN Red List. Um, for for that, we actually found that we got some really good results. So the restored area for the moment has achieved about an 18% species composition recovery. We found that lots of ecological valuable species are increasing in abundance, that there's several endemic and threatened species that have been identified on our restoration areas. But overall, ANR requires a lot of testing, so we want to make sure that these monitoring reports then will actually be used and integrated into how we continue our project, scale up our project, because this 700 hectares is a first instance for a larger project that will be scaled up. So we've noticed that natural regeneration and enrichment methods are the most effective strategies at the moment, and those learnings will definitely be applied. In terms of fauna, we've also recorded lots of different species, mammals, birds. Colombia is very, very rich in bird species, so it's amazing to see even the pictures of those. The most species-rich habitat was the fragmented forest. And we've actually also been able to classify different critically endangered endemic species, which we're actively trying to monitor and focusing on to be able to protect. So this restoration project at the beginning, or at least during the entirety of the carbon project, is a restoration project. But by transforming them into natural reserves, we actually want to move from um, restoration to conservation. So in the long term, we're going to change our techniques and change our monitoring to be able to be doing more conservation work. For the moment, it's fully restoration because that is the nature of the land, that is the nature of our projects. And so we're using lots of different techniques, including, camera traps and different measurements to be aligned with our methodology. So we're aligned with the Vera, for the moment, the Vera O3 methodology, migrating to another, the VM47 methodology, which has been CCP approved, so for higher standards. And we're also aligned with their climate, community, and biodiversity approach through, protecting high conservation values and getting net biodiversity impacts. So at the core of our projects, there's carbon, biodiversity, and society. So it's really kind of a 360 all aspect restoration project.
And so because this is the Nature Tech Collective, I'm super interested in actually the measurement methodologies. You mentioned camera traps. I'm imagining there's kind of field recordings as well. Can you kind of provide a little more color on those?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so we kind of integrate tech throughout the whole value chain and throughout our whole process. So, for the land sourcing, for example, we use a geodata set analysis and this 17 criteria analysis to be able to create a prioritization map. So, we've mapped Colombia and Brazil for the moment. And in Colombia, there's over 10 million hectares of land with high potential for restoration. And in Brazil, the numbers are even crazier. It's around 60 to 70 million hectares of land. So obviously these projects can definitely be scaled up. Then we have our A&R design, which is done through a straight strata analysis and technical mapping on the field. We use a mix between field measurements and satellite measurements for our carbon monitoring. So we use drones and satellite data, as well as different peer-reviewed carbon curves to be able to make our model. And then for the biodiversity monitoring, yeah, as I mentioned, we use camera traps for the fauna, and we're using sampling plots for the flora in collaboration with local universities. And we're also really open to testing new methodologies and there's so much tech development within this space, especially within DMRV, which is really interesting and which would be really interested as well in trying out, whether it's, acoustics or eDNA. There's lots of things that could be implemented for the moment. We're really tracking this baseline, tracking the progress since the beginning of our implementation, but definitely will be implementing more measures. Remote sensing for fire detection. There's so much going on in this space, which is really interesting, and I'd be really interested as well in discussing with members of the community who are developing these kinds of solutions.
Excellent call out. Yeah, and you'll meet them as well as you keep interacting in the Slack at our events, etc. So okay, one of the exciting things that we talked about as we were preparing this was just how you're converting former cattle ranchers into forest rangers, essentially. Um, yeah, I'd love to. I'm really keen to kind of get more into the business model and financing. So maybe let's spend a little less time on this section, but yeah, kind of tell us about your heart, social strategy, and those sorts of aspects of your work, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, and I hope you'd agree that a restoration project and its success is really closely linked to the involvement of local communities. So not only acceptance, but actually being excited about a restoration project. That's You can't have a lasting impact and scale without that. So we really developed a social strategy at the heart of our restoration, which we actually called Heart because it's based on 5 different pillars. It's based on health and well-being, economic empowerment, ambition, education, representation, inclusion, and transparency and exchange. So we actually partnered up with Kinome. They have a great track record in monitoring and developing different social impact projects in Latin America, and our social strategy lead. And Kinome went to Antioquia to be able to do a first baseline and needs analysis. So really assessing the current employment and education landscape and identifying the key areas of improvement, meeting with different community leaders, whether it's teachers, nurses, priests, but also just organizing discussions with members of the community to understand what the main priorities are for them, and then create a prioritization map according to urgency and ease of implementation, so matching those. So as you mentioned, the previous cattle ranchers have actually now become our forest rangers. So they used to be working on the land to, raise their cattle, and now they're working on the same land, which they know by heart. And it's, really impressive. You can actually kind of see it behind me. Super hilly landscape. It's really hard for rangers who don't know the land to just come in and, get their bearings. So, of course, the previous cattle rangers and the people that were actually living on this land know the land the best. We're employing them as forest rangers, but also working with their wives for different maintenance aspects. we really believe that, gender equality is obviously super important, and paying these people above living wage, above minimum wages, which isn't the case for lots of people in the region, unfortunately. So really working with the local community, we have our forest rangers that go as well, about once a month, and making sure that we assess their needs, but also that we work hand in hand with them. So we'll go into the financial model a bit better, but we focus on carbon revenues to be able to reimburse and to have a return on our investment. But any kind of other sources of revenue, whether it's ecotourism or selling fruits from fruit trees, or working in a seedling nursery, which we're actually trying to set up at the moment, those would be directly given just to the local community. And we also have a portion of the revenue from our carbon credits that go into the development of different infrastructures, schools, hospitals, and things like that. So, so yeah, that's kind of more on the social aspect side. It's really at the core of our work, because we're working now in Colombia because half of our team is from Colombia. So making sure that we understand the landscapes, but also the culture, is really important to in developing different restoration projects and initiatives.
Well, I'd love to ask you 1,000 more questions about that, but in the interest of time, I'm going to ask you about the other half of your team, or maybe that's not the other half, but you've been talking about how a large proportion of the NatureRe
Mhm.
team has a background in finance, and how that helps you essentially create different financial structures for various investors, off-takers, corporates. Um, is that a standard kind of makeup for a project developer? What made you do it that way? How is this financial expertise helping you develop relationships with all of these potential investors?
Yeah, no, it's really not that common within project developers, which is why for the moment, we're really situating ourselves as project developers with financial expertise. But on the long term, I think this will actually kind of more change towards, almost like a fund-like structure. We decided to create a profitable business model for nature restoration, because unfortunately, for the scale of work that we need, we can't just rely on philanthropy. We actually need to scale nature restoration, but any kinds of nature positive initiatives um, to, you know, I mean, unimaginable amounts. So we think that it's really important to actually be able to speak the language of investors, to be able to make custom-made models based on different investor profiles, depending on the terms, the duration, the returns that these investors are looking for. We find these investors who will invest into our project at the beginning stage, middle stage, or end stage of our project, depending on their profiles, as I mentioned. And based on that, it's really about matching them with corporates. So we have the investors who are looking to get a return on their investment, and we have this return on investment, which is guaranteed by the carbon revenue, which depends on off-takers purchasing high-quality carbon removal credits. So on the one hand, we have off-takers who are looking to offset their emissions and have a nature positive impact, reach the net zero goals, or reach other types of goals. And on the other hand, we have investors who are looking for an impact investment. And so being able to actually get a return on the investor's investment allows us to scale, to reinvest into different projects, and to create some actual, customized financial deliverables for different financial actors, for different corporates. And we're in the middle, speaking to the investors, speaking to the corporates, developing the project, and so mixing this carbon expertise, this nature restoration expertise, and this financial expertise. So here, I'm still sharing my screen, right? This is
You
kind of
are, yeah. This is your business model, right?
This is kind of the different stages in which you can come in. So you have what we call a project creation investor, which will come in at the very beginning of our project, and it's about developing the project design document. It's about actually purchasing the land, and then once this has come in, we can then have other investors that will come in for the scale up. So for the moment, we're at this project creation stage with our project in Antioquia with the 700 hectares. We're looking for other investors to be able to scale up our project. And then there's some more kind of typical stability investors, which could come in a little bit further on into the process. So depending on the time in which you come in, you have a higher or a lower return. And then for the off takers, we have these off takers that arrive at the beginning through a pre-purchase agreement, which we call the project creation off takers, which we then match with this investor project creator. Um, and then there's other stability off takers that can come in a little bit later, purchase credits on the spot market, and so really trying to make it as custom made as possible, making sure that we find financial solutions that are make sense for different investor types, different off-taker types, looking at individual needs to be able to create projects that have a high impact and a lasting impact. And as I mentioned, after the end of this project duration, which is about 40 years, the project is more of a conservation project. We certify our land as natural reserves as early as year 5, but then they're managed by local authorities and by this Resnature local registration.
All right. Well, that's obviously a really flexible strategy, which seems appropriate for where the market's at right now. I'm actually curious and about what are the just kind of main personas of investors at each of those stages? Do you have a sense of that?
Yeah, there's kind of a mix. So, VCs, different institutional investors would come in usually around closer to the end. Family offices come in actually quite often towards the beginning. For off-takers, it's dependent on kind of their budget and their net zero 2030 or 2050 initiatives. So if you're looking to have or to accomplish some net zero targets for 2030, you can't just start working on them in 2029. So you obviously have to, think of them kind of earlier. And so for different investors, for the moment, our project creation investment was more around family offices and high net worth individuals. For off-takers, we can see that there's some big hegemonic off-takers within the market. It's usually US big, large US tech companies, but we're really hoping to see that be more democratized throughout different corporates. We obviously know that we need to reduce our carbon emissions, but you can't assess or target residual emissions or historical emissions without going to carbon removals. So nature-based solutions are really highly scalable model today. And yeah, we're hoping to see many more investors understand this model, understand the value of nature and not just of carbon, as well as off-takers participating in the carbon market. So yeah.
Amen. Well, yeah, and on that point, right, about kind of de-risking, closing that nature finance gap, you recently partnered with another member of ours, Tree Economy, as we mentioned a little bit earlier, to help scale beyond this pilot. What role are they going to play in your expansion plans? What are the key challenges as well you're looking to address as you grow with them?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned that we use kind of a mix of on-site measurements and tech measurements. Obviously, as we scale up, technology is going to come in and play a more important role. So Tree Economy, they build some high precision remote sensing and AI systems, and they help project developers and others quantify the exact carbon impact of nature restoration projects. So we're partnering with them and working with their geospatial and Earth observation data analysis, working with their different DMRV. As I mentioned, we've done a technical mapping for the land, which is eligible for a restoration methodology. And there is lots of land to restore, but we're going to also leverage tree economies technology for project site eligibility, more specifically once we've narrowed down some areas, but also for, dynamic performance benchmarking and making some precise baseline assessments using their 3D sensing technologies. So they have lots of different technology or aspects of the technology that can really help out with scaling nature restoration projects, making sure that we have good baselines, good monitoring to actually showcase the real impact that we're having on carbon, but then also beyond. So through the forest cover, you can deviate that and have some biodiversity measurements as well. So yeah, we really want to make sure that we're having a de-risked restoration project through the land search, through the land purchase and natural reserve registration, working with the high standards, working with local expertise, and working with some other external partners, which can definitely help out in creating really a comprehensive financial product where we have land price and carbon capture curves that are all optimized to ensure high impact, but also profitability and scalability.
Makes sense. Well, I look forward to hearing about how the collaboration goes, and maybe we can bring you back at a future iteration of this. So for my last question, before I give it to the audience to ask more questions, uh, so as you're scaling this model beyond the 700 hectares, what are some of the most important lessons that you've learned that would be valuable for other project developers in our community? I can see some here.
Yeah. I think climate change, biodiversity loss are complex issues. So sometimes we require complex solutions. We need to make sure that we gather all actors of different ecosystems to be able to create some scalable and replicable solutions. So we definitely need all types of solutions, whether it's avoidance, removal, nature-based, tech-based, because what we need is to scale now. I think for project developers, one of the main lessons is that it's kind of a project developer's responsibility to raise the bar for quality. We've seen lots of different ups and downs in carbon markets, and it's really important for project developers to not only look at carbon, but also look at biodiversity, look at ecosystem restoration as a whole. And I think for investors, we really need to finance projects, and it's actually possible to have a profitable nature-based investment. You're investing in nature, and at the end of the day, what you can find is a natural reserve, but you're also getting a return on your investment. And I think for corporates, as I mentioned, starting to work on different targets now, you can't wait to finish reducing your emissions before you start removing them. It's kind of a process that needs to be done all at the same time. So I think one of the main lessons is really this holistic view on project development, nature restoration, and making sure that we have all actors of the system together.